Hi, I'm Jalestia, and I am coming to you today in order to talk about Paint Tool SAI Basics. This is going to be a video series on the basics of SAI, how the UI works, how everything's structured, um, and a few other things. And today I am going to talk to you about layers. Layers are a little bit tricky for some people, a little bit easier for others, but for me it's not really. Once you get the hang of it, it doesn't really mean much anymore. You just kind of intrinsically understand about it. And the way you can think of a layer. Oh, my stabilizer. Whoops. Just wondering why that was weird. There we go. You can think of a layer as those transparent sheets of paper that your teacher would always use for the overhead projector. And as soon as I realized that that is how it works, let's say you got like a blob here or something. Yeah, a little smile. As soon as you learn that that is what a layer does, just change the color here so you guys can understand with me. Shoop, shoop. There we go. As soon as you understand that's what a layer does, it becomes so infinitely easier. Because basically, when you have a layer, you have one piece of your art that is only affected by anything you put on that. For example, I can scribble all I want on this layer because it's on a different layer than this one here. And all layers by default are transparent until you put something on them. Um, then there's a few other things that you can do with layers that I'll get into in a bit. But basically, that's how a layer works. You can get more in depth, but for the purpose of a beginner, this is basically how a layer works. Um, so let's throw down some scribbles real quick, just so you guys have a frame of reference, because we're going to talk about layer modes. All right. So first, what we have, if you go over to your layers panel, are textures. Textures will basically texture the entirety of of your canvas or your layer. Actually, yeah, it's actually the layer. I'm wrong. Don't listen to me. Uh, and it basically enables it so that way you can. So it looks like you can. It looks like you did this on an actual canvas and just like scanned it versus doing it on a doing it on digital and have everything look perfectly smooth. So this allows you to get a little bit of extra texture in there, which can sometimes look nice. Your first bar over here, your first meter, I suppose, is your scale. And that's just going to tell you how long the grain is on that. I'm not entirely sure if grain's the correct word to use, but um, basically, if you just take a look here, I think that shows up. Okay, yeah, you can see that. You can see how much bigger that's getting. And then this one over here controls the opacity of that, how strong you're going to see that. We'll go over opacity a little bit later. All right. Next, and you've got a few others. You've got paper, watercolor, which is sort of. I don't know if I turned it up. Watercolor is a little bit noisy, not quite like paper. All right, yeah. Paper looks a little bit more like stucco. And then you've got watercolor B, etc. And now your effect, there's really only one effect, I think. I'm not entirely sure if you can get more, but this one is fringe. What fringe does is it gives it this sort of watercolor-ish feel, where if you've ever like actually used watercolors, you'll notice that when you lay down a stroke, the inside of it is going to be it's going to be lighter than the outside. Not entirely sure why that happens, but that's what happens. Um, could probably research that a little bit more. But fringe basically allows you to get a similar effect of that. And unlike the opacity bar on the texture, this one can, well, actually, yeah, it does. It does do that. So your width is going to be how far into your object that it's digging in, and this is going to be your opacity, how much you see that. Your layer modes now, this is a little bit weird. I'm pretty sure I'm right on most of these, but I could also be wrong. Your layer modes dictate how the top layer, like for example layer 2 here, will affect the bottom layer here, or the layer underneath it. So multiply is going to take it and it's going to overlay it on top, but it's going to make wherever it overlaps darker. And I believe it does that just by taking the RGB numbers and multiplying it against that and figuring that out. I'm probably very wrong about that, but basically it just makes it darker. Your screen layer is going to do the opposite and make it much lighter. And notice that this it sort of seems to disappear. That depends on how bright your color is. If your color is too bright, it will disappear against your canvas, but it's still there. Like if you notice right here, it's still there, it's just not visible because this color is already really bright. Overlay is sort of, it's sort of like a color blend. It's sort of like if you were to take two different colors from like an actual palette and mix them together, but not quite. Depending on what color you're using or how light the color is, for example, depends on what it does. If it were a darker color, it would make it darker. If it were lighter, it would make it lighter. But most of the color, it seems, is dictated by what's underneath. But that's basically how overlay works. Okay, and luminosity. Luminosity is like if you took screen and multiplied it. So what it's going to do is going to make the color lighter, and then it's going to amplify that color. It's going to make it so much brighter. And luminosity has an issue called banding. I can get into that in another video, but be careful with luminosity because if you were to do anything, for example, with an airbrush, on luminosity, you could kind of see it. I think if it were a yellow, it'd be easier. Yeah, there you go. Alright, so if you look at this, this is banding right here. This is what happens when your color is too bright. So, and it looks weird. Like you can see it's sort of a mixture of the yellow and blue. So it's got like this teal color, but it's almost too bright. It actually is just too bright because this is basically white now. And anywhere you're going to see color, it's going to just look too bright. It's going to look like a lightsaber. And I guess if you want to do a lightsaber, that's how you do it. Anyway. Next one is shade. Shade does the same as multiply, except it amplifies the color. So if you notice that this color is much more rich and saturated, then that basically means that, again, depending on what color you choose, depends on what it's going to do. but it's basically going to do the same thing as multiply, but it's going to amplify the color. So be a little bit careful with that. Lumion and shade is like luminosity and shade, but it works like overlay. So depending on what color it is, or depending on how bright it is, depends on whether it's luminosity or whether it's shade. So sometimes you can get some interesting effects going in between the two, like that purple. That purple's actually really nice. I like that. And so yeah, and then binary color just makes everything black. It also makes it, I guess you'd call this aliasing. I'm not entirely yeah, it'd be aliasing. Uh, it basically is either that color or it's not that color. There's no in between. Um, Not entirely sure the uses of binary color, but it's an option if you want it. Okay, and then now we have, you've probably seen me messing with these. So what these are, actually, I should go over opacity a little bit. Opacity is basically how much you see something. So if I wanted this to be very prominent, but still you could still sort of see behind it, like you would do in maybe a fog effect, you would turn the opacity down a little bit, not too much. If I wanted you to barely see it, like if it's a mist, then I would turn the opacity all the way down. And you can get some interesting effects if you were to turn on these and then use your multiply, etc. Anyway, okay, so preserve opacity. Preserve opacity is, I'm pretty sure, unless it's been changed, that it doesn't allow you to. No, it does. Okay. It used to be able that it wouldn't allow you to mess with whatever shape this is. Apparently they fixed that. But a preserve opacity, well, it doesn't actually preserve the opacity. Wow. Okay. So that seems kind of like a misnomer. Basically, what I want to do, for example, if I were to want to change just this to be yellow, because if I were to just fill it right now, it would turn the entire canvas yellow, and that's not what we want. If I just wanted to fill this with yellow, I could do preserve opacity and then fill it. And if I turn it off, it doesn't, it's not like a clipping group where, which I will talk about next. It's not like a clipping group where it's still sort of there, but not really. So preserve opacity is basically the easiest way to fill in an object with a color. I can take a look into that some more, probably. Clipping group is how, okay, so say I have my blue, and I want to color in only like this bit here. What I could do is I could make a new layer, turn it to a clipping group, and then I am only able to modify this layer within the boundaries of the bottom layer. So as you can see, I'm not able to color outside of the boundaries set by the bottom layer. However, if I were to turn that off, you would be able to see that I did actually color outside of it, but it just doesn't look like I did. So this can be interesting for when I use it for when I'm coloring something, which is a little bit more of an advanced technique. You can use it for coloring your line work, which it's very good for because it allows you to modify what color that is without touching any other part of the line work. Yeah, I think that's just about it. So if I were to, if you were to have multiple clipping groups, it would clip to the nearest bottom layer. So I can't, yeah, I can't clip this to the blue to the yellow and then clip that to the uh and then clip that to the bottom. Uh, yeah, yeah, to the bottom layer. Uh, I think if you could do that, you'd have some interesting uses. But anyway, so selection source. Uh, if you were to use your wand tool, for example, and you set your target to selection source, whatever layer you select as the selection source, it will only select anything in that layer. And it's doing that because there's transparency and whatever. Um, so basically, it would only select that in the selection layer. Um, Otherwise, it would select everything, and that's sometimes not what you want. This can be very useful for when you're doing line art and you don't want to um, color outside of lines, but the fastest way to do line art is just to fill each section in, you know? Um, that's basically selection source. It lets you deem what it does. Okay, uh, and now you got these little icons here. This icon here just makes a new layer. This one here makes a new line work layer, and line work layers work differently than normal layers in that SAI will treat it as if it were a vector, but it's not an actual vector. It's still a rasterized image, but the way that SAI will treat it is as if it were a vector. So by vector, if you don't know, a vector is it is an object that is mathematically calculated to be scalable. So if you were to see like a company logo, uh, a vector can be scaled to as small as a postage stamp to as big as a building without any loss in resolution. If I were to, for not that, that won't work for my analogy. If I were to scale this up, why, why are you doing that? I might have just made a big mistake. So if you were to scale a raster image all the way up to the size of a building, you would notice that it would become incredible blurry. Like this right here. It's super, super blurry because basically what you're telling the rasterized image when it's scaled up is basically it doesn't have like math to calculate how big that curve should be. So when you're scaling a rasterized image, it doesn't have the information of where those pixels would be. So what it's going to do is it's going to try and assume where those pixels will be. And that's why you get blurry stuff. Um, so, uh, yeah. That's basically how a vector works. Um, and now that you know how a vector works, I can continue on. So basically, how this is going to work, it's good. You'll have anchor points. You'll have paths. Whoops. You'll have anchor points. You'll have paths. You can create them, and you can bend this line to be whatever. This was originally intended to be a tool for you to do line work on. I used to do line work on this, and then because you have absolute control over where this goes. If I don't like this going here, I can just shoot right up there. Um, eh. And so it allows you to have more control over your lines. You can even do, now let's, you can even do stuff like pressure, which will sort of mimic like pen pressure, but not really. Um, shoot, like that. Um, what I found is that it's just not as flexible as a pen, and it doesn't look as natural, in my opinion. But there are plenty of artists that do like to use it, and if you want to use it, go ahead. It's there for a reason. Um, but I personally don't like line work layer. If you notice, though, when you go to a raster layer, your tool set will change. So there's like an entirely different tool set for line work layers. Um, if you so much as want to use that. Anyway, so that's line work layers. Layer sets will allow you to organize layers. Um, for example, if I only want to turn on those layers, like that. If I want to only group those together, um, you could do that. Uh, this here, the little trash can, is just the delete. Delete it just completely eliminates the entire layer. So careful that you don't accidentally press that. Um, this one here is going to be your transfer down layer. And what it's going to do is it's not going to erase the layer, but it's going to take everything that's on this layer and put it to the layer underneath it. So if you look at this right here, it would probably help if I had the navigation panel on, because shoot, I think. Not really. If you were to just take a look at this right here, I know it's a little bit difficult to see, especially with my mouse cursor in the way. But basically, it will just take whatever's on the layer on top, push it to the bottom, but it won't touch these layers in case you need to only transfer down those layers. I personally don't use that often because what I use is the merge. The merge will take this layer, the entirety of this layer, including the layer itself, and push it to the next one. And it's destructive in that it will delete the layer, but it won't delete what's on the layer. Um, the erase tool, or the little eraser here, is the clear layer. So in case you accidentally, in case you just don't like whatever's on that layer, but you still want to keep that layer, there, you can just hit this. It's less destructive than the trash bin here. Yeah. So if you look at okay, so now that we're on the actual layer here, if you look here, there's a little brush, and it will highlight the layer. That's basically your working layer, whatever layer you're on. Sometimes I get confused, and if I don't see the layer and I start drawing, then I'm like, why is this on a different layer? That'd be why, because I'm not on the correct working layer. Another thing is pinning. So if this happens to do with the selection here, and if you were to pin two layers together like that, just by pushing where that little paintbrush would be, I can transform both of those layers. And it would only affect those, so if I wanted to transform just this one here, it would only affect that. But then again, it already does that anyway. So this is basically when you want to move multiple layers together, sometimes like line work, you would want to do that. Especially if you're like me and you have a line for each thing of line work. And that's basically what that does. The little eye turns on and off that layer. And so yeah, that's the basics of layers. If you have any questions about this, let me know in the comment section. If you're coming from Reddit, let me know just by PMing me or replying to whatever post I made this. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.